How's everybody doing? Have fun today so far? Yeah. So I'm the Vice Mayor of Lebanon, Ohio, or Lebanon. Can you get me? And I'm here to read a proclamation. Today is Dr. Don Thomas Day, and on behalf of...
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So who out there wants to grow up and be an astronaut? So those kids who raised their hands, you guys want to help me present this to Dr. Tom? All right, come on up here. You can stand up here with me.
Come on up. Come on up here.
Dad likes to hide that.
The adults can come too if you want. I mean,
Could be the whole room
it
here.
could be the whole room.
Dad really likes to
Yeah. All right.
hide it.
So we got a good little crew here.
This is
Very
great.
good. Yeah.
Come on in.
So on behalf of Lebanon City Council, we are super honored. We're blessed to have one of America's greatest minds as well as greatest explorers with us today. So I'll read this proclamation. May it be proclaimed. Whereas Lebanon wishes to recognize astronaut Dr. Don Thomas, PhD, for his long and distinguished service to his country, and whereas Dr. Thomas flew 4 shuttle missions and orbited the Earth 692 times, and whereas he served his country from July 1991 to July 2007, and whereas he shared today his experiences and knowledge with the Lebanon students and citizens as part of the Lebanon Public Library's celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 lunar landing. Now, therefore, I am not Amy Brewer, I'm Mark Messer, but on behalf of her, by virtue of the authority vested in me as the mayor of the city of Lebanon and the state of Ohio, I do hereby proclaim May 10th, 2019 as Dr. Thomas Day.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you so much. That is really special.
It's amazing.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Let me tell you, I just turned 64 a few days ago. I've never had anything like this in my 64 years on planet Earth. So this is the very first Don Thomas Day that I've ever had a proclamation made, and this is really special. Thank you so much. From my heart. Thank you. Wow. That's great. Well, welcome everybody. And as you heard, my name is Don Thomas. I had the amazing opportunity to fly on 4 Space Shuttle missions. 3 of those were on Space Shuttle Columbia. 1 was on Space Shuttle Discovery. And I've spent a total of 44 days. And as you heard, I went around the Earth 692 times. So I had an amazing opportunity to see planet Earth during those flights. And I first got interested in being an astronaut when I was only 6 years old. I watched the first American go into space at my elementary school up in Cleveland, where I grew up. And at that moment, I knew I wanted to be an astronaut. The next year, John Glenn, the first American to orbit the Earth, I watched his launch. And that reinforced, I want to be an astronaut. 7 years later, Neil Armstrong, you guys ever hear of him? Landed on the moon, and I was 14 years old. I wanted to do that, so I always wanted to be an astronaut. And people ask, like, how is it that Ohio has so many astronauts, more than any other state? And because we had incredible role models, the Wright brothers here, John Glenn, Neil Armstrong. If you ask most of the shuttle era, space station era astronauts, like, what influenced you? You're going to hear John Glenn, you're going to hear Neil Armstrong over and over again. These are great role models. So I wanted to start, before I start my formal presentation, does anybody recognize this gentleman?
Yep,
This is Neil Armstrong here. So let me tell you, on my 3rd mission, I was launching aboard Space Shuttle Columbia, and I wrote Neil Armstrong a letter just saying I'm one of the Ohio astronauts. I told him that he was one of my heroes as a young boy growing up, and that I was going to be launching on the Space Shuttle in a few months, and I invited him to come down to the launch. He wrote back very simply, "I'll be there." And it was like, wow, Neil Armstrong's coming to my launch. I was so excited about that. And the day before launch at the Kennedy Space Center, I got a call from NASA management. And they said, Mr. Armstrong wanted to meet with me. It was like, wow, that's incredible. So I got to spend an hour one-on-one. That's Neil Armstrong, his wife Carol, then me, and then on the far right-hand side, that's my wife Simone. And we got to spend about an hour together. And I tell you, I flew in space 4 times. That was an incredible experience. If you ask me what's the coolest thing in your life that happened, I would say, I got to spend an hour with Neil Armstrong. No kidding. I mean, it's from my heart. He was my childhood hero, and to have that opportunity was just incredible. At the end of our hour, it was time for him to leave, and I shook his hand. I said, Mr. Armstrong, thanks so much for being here. You know, it means so much to me. And I asked him, I said, how long are you staying in town for? Meaning, how long are you going to be in Florida for? And he looked me right back in the eye. He said, how long are you in town for? Meaning, I'm going to stay here until you launch. And to have Neil Armstrong tell you that, it's really incredible. And we launched right on time the next day. And on launch morning, Neil Armstrong went and met my mom to say hi to her, send his greetings. He also met with my wife Simona again. He just greeted her. It just tells you what kind of person, you know, Neil Armstrong was. He was a good Ohioan, right? And that's why I love coming back to my home state here. So that's one picture. I have a second picture of me and Neil Armstrong. So, and you may not know who's who, so let me help you. That's me right there and Neil Armstrong. If you've seen the book, First Man, you know, the movie came out recently. The book, this picture was in the book. I didn't notice that for years and just was rereading the book, and I saw that picture. I says, oh, that's the launch. I think this is the first space shuttle launch that Neil Armstrong came to. And I was just honored. He's about 3.5 miles from there. So I just wanted to share that with you. He's a really special person in my life, and I'm so honored to be in Lebanon, where he spent many, many years here. So what I want to share with you tonight is tell you a little story about the day a woodpecker attacked the space shuttle. Let me just start by saying true story here, okay? So this story takes place at Cape Canaveral. This is in central Florida here. It's a little peninsula, a cape coming out over the Atlantic Ocean. And this is what it looks like from the space shuttle. So you might see a little thin line here. That's our shuttle runway, landing strip. Here's the vehicle assembly building. We've got 2 shuttle, this is the vehicle assembly building right there. These are 2 shuttle launch pads, pads 39B and 39A. 39A is where Neil Armstrong launched on the Apollo 11 mission, but this mission, the incident takes place at 39B, right next door. So it's beautiful to see from space. And whenever the space shuttle would pass over the Kennedy Space Center, you'd have all the astronauts with their noses pressed up against the glass. And we'd be just like, wow, there's our launch pad, there's our landing strip there. It was always a great place to pass over. And not only is it our launching site for the United States, but this is also part of the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge. And this was established in 1963, 140,000 acres. Then they're protecting very specific types of habitats there. We got coastal dunes and saltwater estuaries. There's really a lot of unique habitats. And it's home to 15 federally listed or threatened or endangered species, home of 500 species of wildlife, and more than 1,000 species of plants. So it's really an incredible wildlife area, and it's a tough place to launch rockets because of that. Because it's a wildlife refuge, we can't harm any of the wildlife there. And try to launch a rocket when you have all this wildlife, it's a challenge, but NASA does a good job at it. And if you ever go down there, this wildlife that you see is very common. You see manatees. I was just down there about a year ago in April, and my wife and I were near the edge of the water in a little cove area there at the Kennedy Space Center, and we watched 30 or 40 manatees just swimming around for about an hour. It was really incredible. You see bobcats, deer, bald eagles, alligators. I always tell people when you're watching a launch, every now and then look down by your feet because they're all over there. And even wild boar. I grew up in Cleveland. I never saw a wild boar in my life, but you go down to the Kennedy Space Center and it's not unusual near dawn or dusk to see a family on the side of the road there. I was just down there last month and I saw two of the days going in and out of the Kennedy Space Center, a family, like a group of 4 or 5 of them there. So there's all kind of incredible wildlife there at the Kennedy Space Center. It's also home to the northern flicker woodpecker, which is the enemy in this story. These woodpeckers like to live in open habitats near trees. They generally nest in holes in trees like other woodpeckers. Their primary food is insects. They like grubs, little ants and termites, but they also eat berries and seeds. And they often drum on trees or metal objects to declare their territory. So sometimes woodpeckers are drilling into a tree or an object looking for food. They're trying to get termites. Sometimes they're drilling to build a nest. Sometimes they're drilling just to declare their territory. If you have a loud woodpecker, tapping away, then it'll scare away the other woodpeckers if it sounds really loud and like a big woodpecker is doing that. So they often drum on trees or metal objects to declare their territory. And they're a protected species at the Kennedy Space Center, as all wildlife is, which means they cannot be harmed in any way. Okay? That's a key point here. So this is the crew from my second mission. We were going to be launching aboard Space Shuttle Discovery, and our mission was to deploy a big communication satellite. It's called the Tracking and Data Relay Satellite. And this is one of a network of satellites that we have orbiting the Earth that the astronauts use to talk to mission control. So we still use these today. If you've ever seen any of the credible images from the Hubble Space Telescope, all that scientific data, all those images get relayed back to Earth through this network of satellites. And we were deploying the last one from the Space Shuttle. So this is our crew. We got together for our first crew meeting, and we noticed something unusual about the crew. And that was 4 of the 5 of us, as it turns out, were from the state of Ohio. Our commander here in the center is Tom Hendricks. He was an Air Force test pilot. He was from Toledo, Ohio. Nancy Curry, one of our flight engineers, she grew up in Troy, not too far from here. She was an Army helicopter pilot, has like 5,000 hours in the Black Hawk helicopter. Mary Ellen Weber and I, we were both PhD. Mary Ellen's got a PhD in chemistry, and I got a PhD in materials engineering. We were both from the Cleveland area. So 4 out of 5 from Ohio. Only this guy was not from Ohio. And not only was he not from Ohio, he was from New York. And not just New York, he was from a town called Amityville. Have you ever heard of the movie Amityville Horror? Yeah, Kevin, this is Kevin Kriegel. He was an Air Force test pilot as well. He was from Amityville. So we thought we had something special here with so many Ohioans on the flight. And here's our official crew picture. Now, I know I show this to people across the United States, and they don't get this, but this is easy for you. Can you pick out the New Yorker? We didn't think this was fair to Kevin. We didn't want to exclude him from the Ohio celebration of this mission. So I had the idea of writing to Governor Voinovich, the governor of Ohio at the time, and asking him, can you make our New Yorker an honorary Ohioan? So I called down in Columbus. I talked to somebody on the phone, and I said, I'm Don Thomas, one of the Space Shuttle astronauts. We have 4 of the 5 astronauts from Ohio. We'd like to make our 5th crew member an honorary Ohioan, and then we could say we have the all-Ohio Space Shuttle mission. And the person on the other end of the phone said, who are you? And I said, I'm Don Thomas. I explained it again, and then it was like, and what do you want? And I explained it again. Then they transferred me to somebody else, and their first question was, who are you? And then the second was, what do you want? And they transferred me around, but eventually I got to the person who was in charge of developing proclamations for the governor, and the governor was kind enough. He made an official proclamation from the state of Ohio, officially recognizing Kevin Kriegel, NASA astronaut, as an honorary Ohioan. And at one of our crew meetings, we presented this to Kevin. He had a big smile on his face, and all of a sudden he went pale. And he started reading the fine print down here. It says, thus extending to him all the rights and privileges held dear by all citizens of our state. And Kevin looked up and he said, do I have to pay taxes in Ohio now? We assured him he did not, and he had a big smile again. So at this moment, we had the all-Ohio Space Shuttle mission. And we let Kevin take his helmet off. That's what he looks like. So Nancy Curry is an alumna from Ohio State, and she had an idea of designing our crew patch with a vaguely familiar Block O, right? Tom Hendricks, our commander, said, this is too obvious. Everybody's going to pick up what this is about. So we changed the color. We did a black border instead of the red, just so we wouldn't get, this would get approved by NASA headquarters in Washington. They have to approve all of our patches, and they didn't want to, get the other 49 states all annoyed. So this is our official patch design, and it is the Block O, and once NASA headquarters approved it, we said this is for Ohio. So we had the All-Ohio Space Shuttle mission, and that was a lot of fun for all of us, even Kevin. So we went out to California. This is a few months before our launch. This is the satellite we were going to be deploying. It was built, manufactured out at TRW near Los Angeles there, and they were just getting ready to ship it down to the Kennedy Space Center, and we were there the week before and just took a group picture of all of us with our satellite. Now our satellite, we deploy it from the Space Shuttle about 200 miles above the Earth. And the satellite, these communication satellites, need to go 21,000 miles above the Earth. So they all have an upper stage, we call it rocket motor, attached to the satellite. And once we deploy it from the shuttle at 200 miles, then this rocket motor fires, takes it out to 21,000 miles where these communication satellites sit. So this is the upper stage, and you can tell by some of the people up here how huge that upper stage is. And here's our upper stage, and there's our satellite about to get installed into the payload bay of the shuttle. And once they put it in there, it goes in the payload bay. That's roughly the size of what it looks like back there. So it's a fairly large payload on board the shuttle. So we got everything set. They're getting the space shuttle ready. They roll it out of a big hangar called the Orbiter Processing Facility. They move it over to a big building called the Vehicle Assembly Building, where we stack the space shuttles and get them ready for launch. They come in with a huge crane. They lift the space shuttle up. They take it way up in the air over a beam, and then they slowly lower it down, and they bolt it to our big external fuel tank. That big orange tank is our external tank. That holds 500,000 gallons of fuel for us. And then we have two white rockets called solid rocket boosters on either side. So they're lowering it down. They bolt all those pieces together. Once that's all done, we roll the space shuttle out to the launch pad. Now this is called the mobile launch platform here. And the space shuttle gets bolted down to this launch platform with 8 huge bolts. They're about the size of a baseball bat. They're made out of stainless steel, and it's these 8 bolts that bolt the space shuttle to that launch platform. And we move it out in the middle of the night. There's a crawler transporter that comes underneath, lifts up this platform and the shuttle, and slowly inches its way out to the launch pad. So here's our vehicle assembly building, and this crawler transporter takes it here, takes it up to the launch pad. It's about 3.5 mile trek. And I rode on this one time, and that crawler transporter has a speedometer, and it goes from 1 to 3 miles an hour. And top speed is like 2 miles an hour. But it's pretty amazing. This vehicle it's carrying goes 17,500 miles an hour, but going out to the launch pad, it's like 1-2 miles an hour. That's it. And we do it nice and slow so it doesn't start swaying or tip over. And typically we do this in the middle of the night when the winds are the lightest, the calmest, and less chance of thunderstorms and other weather conditions. So we move it out to the launch pad. Here's our crawler transporter. It lowers it down on a couple of launch platforms out at the launch pad. And then that crawler transporter will drive away. Over here on the left-hand side of this picture, this is called the rotating service structure. And once you have the shuttle on the launch pad, this thing rolls over and covers the front of the shuttle to protect it from the weather. And that's what it looks like when that's rolled in front. So you can't see the shuttle here. It's protected from thunderstorms. If there was hail, it'll be protected. All you can see here is the top of our orange fuel tank and the tips of those white solid rocket boosters, okay? So you just see in the top portion of that. The back side of the tank that you can't see is unprotected. But this is really designed just to protect the space shuttle on the launch pad, okay? So 1 week before our scheduled launch, a woodpecker came by and started drilling holes in our big fuel tank. And the fuel tank is made out of aluminum. It's like a giant soda can. And it's covered with 3 to 4 inches of foam insulation, polyurethane foam, like you may have in your attic and your garage at home. And this woodpecker comes flying by, starts drilling a hole trying to make a nest. And after drilling in 3 or 4 inches, it hits the aluminum. Can't go any further, so the woodpecker's no dummy. He moves over a few feet and drills another hole. And it ultimately hits the aluminum and then makes another hole, makes another hole and another hole. And a few things impressed me about this. It was one woodpecker did all this damage. And this one woodpecker made 205 holes in our fuel tank. Just one woodpecker. The second thing that really impressed me about this was NASA had about 100 hours of video of this. And like you, I was wondering, why didn't somebody stop this after 20 holes, 40 holes, or 100 holes? You know, when the woodpecker would move from one location to another, somebody would move the camera, they would zoom in, focus, and then we'd watch it, and then the woodpecker would move. And when I saw all this, it's like, what happened? I never got an answer to that, but nobody did. And what happened, this one woodpecker ended up making 205 holes in our big fuel tank. These are just some of the holes there. Most of them were about 1 inch across. The biggest was about 4 inches. So NASA had to figure out, okay, what do we do? The press got hold of this. And these are some of the headlines. I cut them out of newspapers here. Wings clipped by woodpeckers and birds poke holes in scientists' plans. Plan has holes. So everybody was making fun of NASA because of this incident. And NASA, you know, the first thing they wanted to do was to assess the damage of it. You know, how bad was it? So they had people come in with cranes and they mapped the whole external tank, our big fuel tank. And they wanted to see how many holes. They counted them, they measured them. They wanted to see where they were located. And what NASA wanted to do ideally would be, let's just repair this out at the launch pad. And maybe that would delay our mission a week or so. So they brought in cranes, had workers going all over mapping it. They brought in scaffolding so that they could reach all parts of the fuel tank. And after doing that, they finally decided this is not safe to have our workers patching it up so high up above the flame pit there at the launch pad. So NASA made the decision, we're going to have to roll the shuttle back to our vehicle assembly building and do the repairs there. And the minute they made that decision, we knew we had about a 1 month delay because it takes them that long to roll back and then get it back out to the launch pad. So they had the workers come in. They have polyurethane foam. You could buy cans of this at Home Depot, spray it in the holes. The guy's got a little tongue depressor like a popsicle stick. He would just smooth it out, let it harden for 5 or 6 hours, take a piece of sandpaper, smooth it out, and then move on to the next hole. So they had to patch up all those woodpecker holes. And then they moved the shuttle back out to the launch pad to try it again. And that's when I went out there to ride on the crawler transporter when they were carrying it out there. And I told you this thing goes about 1 mile an hour. And our crew went out there. We got on the vehicle. It was about midnight or 1 in the morning. And we got on there. We were talking to the crew on the crawler transporter. And we talked to them for maybe 45 minutes as it's moving out to the launch pad. And after that time, we hopped off the crawler transporter. And then we had to walk all the way back to our car, which was about maybe 50 yards away. That's as far as we had gotten in about 45 minutes. And this is a picture I took. This is the backside of the tank, and all these little white areas are the patches from the woodpecker who did the damage. It almost looks like somebody took a shotgun and just blasted the tank there, right? So we fixed the tank. We're ready to go, but NASA still had a big problem. How do you prevent the woodpeckers from doing this again? The press made fun of NASA happening once. If it happened a second time, imagine what they would do and say there. But fortunately, NASA had a lot of help. People from across the United States and around the world who knew a lot about woodpeckers had solutions. The first solution that came in, somebody said, get a gun. Not a good solution. First of all, it's a wildlife refuge, right? We cannot harm the woodpeckers at all. Secondly, maybe more important, it's never a good idea to shoot a gun near a fully fueled space shuttle, okay? So NASA ruled that one out. Somebody else had the idea, let's mount a jet engine up above the space shuttle. We'll have the exhaust going, and that'll keep the woodpeckers away. I don't know how you would do that from an engineering point of view. It doesn't sound feasible. NASA ruled that one out. Somebody said if you paint that orange tank blue, woodpeckers don't like the color blue. I don't know if that's true or not, but that would add about 400 to 600 pounds of weight all that paint on that big fuel tank. NASA ruled that one out. Another idea, somebody said, paint the tank with skunk cabbage juice. Now, I'm a city boy from Cleveland. I have no idea what skunk cabbage juice smells like. I have a good mental picture of it, and not only would it scare away the woodpeckers, it would scare away the astronauts and all the workers. They ruled that one out. So finally what they came up with, they have these balloons, and they're called predator eye balloons. And these have giant eyes on them, and they're the eyes of a hawk or an eagle or a vulture, something like that, an owl. Those are the natural predators of a woodpecker. So if a woodpecker comes flying by, sees a huge set of eyes, thinking, wow, that's a huge owl, I'm not going anywhere near that, it'll keep on flying. So they put these all over. Here's one you see here. Again, they're called terror eye or predator eye balloons. You can buy these at local hardware store, and they sell them for people with fields, to protect their crops, kind of like a scarecrow. And so NASA came up with a team also to prevent any woodpeckers from coming back, and it was called the Bird Investigation, Review, and Deterrent Team, the BIRD team. Only an acronym that NASA could come up with. And they had this team that came up with the plans for how to keep the space shuttle safe. And their idea, again, were these balloons. So I laughed when NASA was moving the space shuttle out to the launch pad that second time. On the very top of the external tank there, they had one of these balloons. And I was looking up at that thinking, they're moving this out in the middle of the night. We've got these diesel engines belching out black smoke, making a lot of noise. I don't think there's any woodpeckers on the way out to the launch pad, but NASA was just being cautious, making sure. Here's another one, a pair of them down here. And here you see a worker, and it's a little hard to tell, but he's got an air horn in his hand. So he's on patrol. If he sees a woodpecker, he can just send a blast off like that to scare away the woodpeckers. They also had workers with super soakers, little water cannons, and they would be on patrol. And if they saw a woodpecker, they could squirt out a blast of water. Okay, we can scare it, we can shoo it away, but again, you can't harm the woodpecker. They also played in like sound, the noise of the screeching owl or a hawk, just the noises of that. Again, so if a woodpecker came by, it would hear a huge screech, thinking, oh, that's a huge owl, or hawk over there, I'm not going anywhere near the launch pad. And then they put these balloons out. And one final thing they did, they put plastic owls out there as well. These you can buy at Home Depots, other stores like that. And again, the owl is a natural predator. Woodpecker sees the owl, not going anywhere near that space shuttle. So I showed you our crew patch, right? The All-Ohio Space Shuttle mission. Well, after this woodpecker attack, somebody modified the patch a bit. And I have to object to your laughing here. Can you tell whose name they covered up on this patch? So this was one of the engineers working in Mission Control in Houston. They put Woody Woodpecker on there, and Woody Woodpecker became like the unofficial mascot of our mission. So I'm famous in my life because I'm a member of the Woodpecker crew. Sadly, this is how I'm known, but now I've got a proclamation, so I don't need that other title. So these are a few cartoons, political cartoons, and this one says, we made a slight design change. It scares the woodpeckers away. And you see a little beak on the space shuttle there. This one's my favorite here. Two aliens talking, and one says to the other, something called a woodpecker put holes in it, and we can't take off. So there were a lot of these cartoons that were put out there, and again, the press was making a lot of fun at NASA about this. And the workers down at the Kennedy Space Center, they put up a sign on a telephone pole, and it just says, Official Woodpecker External Tank Training Post. Everything we do at NASA is all about training, training, training. So they put up this sign, and the woodpeckers were allowed to come here and drill all the holes they wanted to and train all they wanted to. So when something like this happens, when an event like this happens, there's two reactions you can have. One, you could get mad. The second is to laugh about it. And I think that's what our crew did when we heard a woodpecker attacked our shuttle. We just laughed. They said, that's crazy. How could that happen? And most of the workers down at the Kennedy Space Center had that same philosophy. Everybody laughed about this. They even came up with a patch This is the Kennedy Space Center drill team with Woody Woodpecker standing on top of our big external tank. So, we fixed the problem, fixed all the holes. We had ways to keep the woodpeckers away. It's time to get on with the mission. And typically 1 week before our scheduled launch, the astronauts go into quarantine. We have to leave our families. For the first 3 days of that, we're in quarantine at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. And then 3 days before launch, we get in our T-38 jets. We fly down to the Kennedy Space Center, and the last 3 days, we're in quarantine down there. And the whole idea of quarantine is so we're not exposed to anybody with a cold or the flu that we would get sick in space. And so flying down to the Kennedy Space Center, if the weather is good, if it's a nice clear day, we can do a pad flyby, we call it. So they let us drop down in our jets about 1,000 feet above the ground, and they let us circle around the launch pad. And this is a picture I took from the T-38 I was in. Here's the nose of another one. So we had 4 T-38s coming in formation. And this is an amazing sight to look out your window and look down there and you see your space shuttle. It's ready to go. It's just waiting for the astronauts. And to look out the window and see that, that always got the butterflies going like, wow, that's my shuttle. It's waiting for us. 3 days from right now, I'm going to be in that thing blasting off. Really exciting moment. On launch morning, we get up about 5 or 6 hours before our scheduled launch. We have a quick breakfast. Then we go to the suit-up room, we put on our space suits, and then we walk out to what's called the Astro Van, and that drives us out to the launch pad. It's about 10 miles or so, takes about 15 minutes to get out there. And I don't think you can see here, but in some of our hands, we're carrying Buckeyes with us. And I had an uncle up in Cleveland that sent me a couple Buckeyes. We had a number of people send us Buckeyes, so all of us were carrying those in our pocket. Even our honorary Ohioan Kevin had a pocket full of Buckeyes for him as well. This is a view I took out the window of this Astro Van. We're driving out to the launch pad, and at one point we turn a corner, and straight ahead is the space shuttle. And you see it there. We have a police escort here, and when you see the space shuttle, and there's no workers out here at all. Usually you go out to the launch pad, there's a lot of workers, keeping those woodpeckers away. But on launch morning, there's nobody out there. And it's another amazing view. This would get the butterflies going when I saw the shuttle straight ahead of me moving out to the launch pad. We take an elevator up. I'm standing here in front of Space Shuttle Discovery. We go up to what's called the 195-foot level. And this is where there's an access arm right behind me where we crawl across that to get inside the shuttle. There I am about to crawl in the hatch. And before I do, these 2 gentlemen in the white suits will help us put on a parachute harness. They check out all of our equipment. Then I get on my hands and knees, crawl on that whiteboard. We get inside. We're sitting in seats similar to what you're sitting in tonight, but because the shuttle is tilted upright for launch, we're actually laying down on our backs for liftoff. And they strap us in. We've got shoulder harnesses and seat belts. For our young students in here, it's like being in a car seat when you were young. They strap us in good and tight because there's a lot of shaking and vibration. You don't want to bounce out of your seat and hurt yourself. Damage any equipment, so they get us strapped in good and tight. Once we're all strapped in, they close and seal that side hatch, and then everybody moves away from us about 3.5 miles. And when you realize why they just moved away from you 3.5 miles, that's another good moment to get butterflies in your stomach. They're getting out of what we call the blast zone. If you're farther than 3.5 miles and anything bad should happen, you're probably okay. If you're any closer, could be an issue. But we know the risks. I mean, the astronauts, we're in there, we're ready to go, we're excited about the mission. And it's very quiet for us up until 6 seconds before liftoff. At that point, the 3 engines at the tail of the shuttle start coming up to full power. 6 seconds later, we light our 2 big white solid rocket boosters. And the instant they light, boom, immediately you take off. And laying on my back in my seat, I'd hear the roar of the engines. I could feel all the shaking and vibration. And right at that moment of liftoff, I always felt this push in my back. And it felt to me as if somebody had their hand right in the middle of my back, and they were just shoving me up into the sky. And that's what the shuttle's doing, literally shoving us, tossing us up in the air. This is a picture of my wife watching the launch. She's 3.5 miles away outside the blast zone, right? And you can see her eyes are focused right on the shuttle. And as we launched, if you would watch her eyes, she's just tracking upward higher and higher. My son, on the other hand, is looking at a bug on the ground here. So people ask me, is your son impressed that you're an astronaut? I always point to Exhibit A here. He said, nah, not too impressed. He was only 5 months old at the time. 8.5 minutes after liftoff, the engine shut down. It's perfectly quiet for a second. Then there's a big kaboom. We fire some explosive bolts and the space shuttle would separate from that fuel tank. And we always take pictures of this fuel tank after we separate from it. 2 of the astronauts will get out of our seats, grab some cameras, and this fuel tank is slowly tumbling as it falls back to Earth. It's the only part of the shuttle we did not reuse. And NASA was particularly interested in us getting pictures of this one to make sure that there were no problems with the patches from the woodpecker holes. So we photograph it every time, because if there was a problem with this tank, we want to know about it now before we launch the next crew. So we just do it for safety. But we didn't see any damage. All the patches seemed to hold well. So typically on the first day of going into space on the space shuttle, it's a very quiet day. They let us slowly adapt, get used to zero gravity, and you're slowly unpacking your equipment. When we have satellites on board, we want to get these out as quick as we can, because that big upper stage rocket motor has a lot of explosive fuel in it. And NASA wants to get that out of the shuttle as quick as they can to minimize any chance of an accident. So on these missions, the first day is incredibly hectic, very busy. We launch these satellites 6 hours after we launch. So as soon as we get to space, we took pictures of that fuel tank, and then immediately we're starting to get out of our spacesuits and we start checking out the satellite. There's a very detailed procedure we have to go through to make sure it's totally functioning, ready to go before we release it. Ultimately, it takes a couple hours to do that. We tilt it up to about a 60-degree angle. And my main work on this mission, my main responsibility was the deployment of the satellite. So after checking this out, there's one final step in the procedure, and it says push deploy button. And I got to push that button. I'm sensing you're not too impressed by this. It's a very complicated button. I tell my family, I pushed that button, and they're like, I can push that button. It's a very complicated button. No, seriously, there's a lot of training involved. And once we push the button, the satellite slowly inches its way out of the payload bay. And this is a view of it as it was moving away from us. And we would have loved to just stay there and watch this thing fade out into the blackness of space. We trained for a full year on deploying the satellite. We get to watch it for about 5 minutes, because we have to get out of there in about 15 minutes. This rocket motor is going to fire to take that satellite out to 21,000 miles. We don't want to be anywhere near there in case this plume should hit the shuttle, in case that rocket motor fails and it explodes, damaging the shuttle. So unfortunately, we can only watch it for about 5 minutes. And then it was time to get out of town. We did an engine burn, moved the shuttle a few miles away, and we never saw the satellite again. About 24 hours later, it successfully made it out to 21,000 miles. This is an artist's drawing of that. You see solar panels for generating electricity, 2 big dish antennas here for communication. It's still functioning. This was 24 years ago. It's still working almost perfectly out over the Pacific Ocean. So let me show you this first before I show you that next picture. Let me just tell you, our flight director in Mission Control in Houston had a big rule for the flight. And that was, he wanted no woodpecker jokes until after we deployed the satellite. The satellite was the main objective of this mission. He didn't want anybody distracted with woodpecker jokes, goofing around like that. So everybody obeyed that. But after the satellite got deployed, it was open season on woodpeckers. And Mission Control sends us up messages every morning. We have like a fax machine, and the printer sends up these messages. This is number 23, I think, and it's titled STS-70 pre-launch photo, and it features a giant woodpecker attacking our external tank. They changed the name of our space shuttle from Discovery to Spruce Goose here. And there's this little note on the bottom. It says, "We promise this is the last woodpecker joke." I worked in Mission Control. I know those people. They're terrible liars. We knew this was not going to be the last woodpecker joke, and it wasn't. This is a picture of Nancy and Kevin. Again, Nancy grew up in Troy, not too far from here. In space, there's no up or down. Wherever your head is pointed in space, that direction is up. Wherever your feet is pointed, that's down. So Nancy's looking at Kevin saying, hey, Kevin, you're upside down. Kevin's looking right back at her saying, no, you're upside down. If you want to sit up on the ceiling, you can easily do that. And you look at everybody else in the room and think they're upside down there. So you're never upside down, it's everybody else. That tells you just a little something about the ego of an astronaut, right? It's not me, it's you. We sleep on the wall in sleeping bags. This is Kevin sleeping on the wall here. Here we had a double decker, so somebody else was sleeping up above him. We wear dark eye shades because we go around the Earth every hour and a half. You get 45 minutes of daylight, 45 minutes of nighttime. If you don't want the sun coming in your eyes all the time, you need to wear the eye shades. He's got his arms crossed like this because here on Earth with gravity, if you totally relax, your arms will fall to your side. In space, if you totally relax, the arms tend to come up and float right there. So imagine you wake up in the morning, you open your eyes, and the first thing you see are two hands floating in front of your face. Our astronauts are not that brave, so we took our arms in like you see here. And the real reason we do it, you see a lot of cables and switches off to the side. You don't want your arm in the middle of the night floating over there, hitting a switch, bumping a cable, doing some damage. This is our little food station. All of our food is freeze-dried food. It comes in small plastic packages. We add hot water. Once we get to space, the food softens up, and after a few minutes, it's ready to eat. I always say the space food is okay. It's not delicious. I would never go to a restaurant that serves space food. So don't go up there for the fine cuisine, but the view out the window is incredible. Here's Nancy Curry, and she was a big exercise fanatic, and we had a bicycle we'd ride every day up there. We could pedal the bike, it would get your leg muscles working, get your heart muscle working, and I came down in the middeck one day, and Nancy's upside down, pedaling the bike with her arms, just giving her upper body a workout there, and it looked so unusual, something you could only do in space, right? And here you see a woody woodpecker talking on the radio. On the first day of the mission, we opened up one of the drawers of one of the lockers, and this woody woodpecker came floating out of it. And the launch team down at the Kennedy Space Center had snuck this on board. They got it from Universal Studios in Orlando. They shipped it over, and so woody woodpecker was joining us on this mission as well. One day on the mission, we woke up in the morning, and we looked at the window, we took the cover off the window, and we saw that we had been hit by something as we were sleeping. You hear sometimes about space debris, space junk out there. And the Air Force at NORAD in Colorado, they could track everything that's orbiting our Earth bigger than the size of my fist. And we know where the orbits of that are. If an object is coming close to the shuttle, we'll move out of the way. Anything smaller than my fist, we have no idea. And occasionally there's an impact. If it's the size of a marble or BB, it's going to blow a big hole in the side of your shuttle. That's not, you can't recover from that. But this happened. This was a small particle. We think it was like a flake of paint from an old rocket stage. And something as simple as a grain of sand, when it's traveling at 17,500 miles an hour, has a lot of energy to it. And it hit our window. It caused a little crater, so that little white dot you see there is the crater, maybe a 1/16 of an inch across. And you see the little vaporization pattern, the ray pattern, from whatever hit us, it vaporized and deposited on the window. And it just reminds you about the space junk that's out there. This didn't hurt us at all. Our windows have a total thickness of about 2.5 inches. We've got 3 panes of glass total. If one pane should crack, not a problem. If 2 of them should crack, not a problem. If 3 should crack, big problem. So we got hit by a piece of space debris. And NASA sent us up this little cartoon. This is what really happened to Windows 6. So you have 2 astronauts talking, hey, did you hear that? Oh my heavens, it sounds like it came from near Windows 6. They look out Windows 6 and guess who caused the problem? So anything bad that happened on this mission, can you guess who got blamed? It was Woody Woodpecker. Exactly right. Here's our crew picture. We're holding a banner. This is Case Western Reserve University up in Cleveland. That's my alma mater. We took up banners from a lot of the Ohio colleges, from Ohio University, University of Toledo, Case Western Reserve, Ohio State. You know, we each tried to take a couple of banners from our favorite universities just to represent Ohio. And people ask, why so many astronauts from Ohio? You know, I think we have a good work ethic here. We have a really great education system. Our public schools are some of the best in the country right here. And we also have the water in Lake Erie that we would drink. And that also makes great astronauts, right? So I just want to share with you a few pictures looking out the window. Here I got a map in my hand looking out the back window, and this is what I get to see out the back. That just gives you a little piece of what the Earth looks like from 200 miles. All the blue in this image is the Pacific Ocean. The blue, yeah, is the Pacific Ocean. The white areas are puffy clouds. This little peninsula coming down is Baja, California. Here's the sunrise from space. Because we go around the Earth every hour and a half, we see 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets every 24-hour day. And from space, what you're looking at here is our atmosphere. And from space, it looks paper thin. And you realize what a thin layer of air that's protecting us here on planet Earth. On a nice sunny day here in Lebanon, you look up at that blue sky and it looks like it goes on forever and ever. From space, we see it edge on and it looks paper thin. And every astronaut will come back from space and they'll tell you about how thin this atmosphere is protecting us on planet Earth and the need to take better care of our planet. One of my favorite parts of the world was out over Egypt. So at the top here is the Mediterranean Sea. This is the Nile Delta and the Nile River cutting through Egypt. The Nile River is about a quarter of a mile across or so. But what you're looking at here is maybe a 5-mile wide path where they do irrigation along the river. This big bend here, this is where the Valley of the Kings is, King Tut right there. This is the Red Sea and the Suez Canal cutting through there. This was always one of my favorite parts of the world. I visited Egypt when I was in college back in 1980. We went to the Valley of the Kings, and the air is perfectly clear, low humidity here. You got brown desert. You got beautiful blue waters of the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. It doesn't show up in this picture. And then the bright green of the Nile Delta is just spectacular to see from space. And here's one of the last pictures from the mission. At the end of the mission, it's time to come home. We'll do an engine burn and fall back to Earth. And on this flight, I was sitting downstairs for the re-entry. So Tom, our commander, is just off on the right-hand side. Kevin Kriegel, our honorary Ohioan, is here on the left. And Mary Ellen and Nancy were up on the flight deck, and my seat was down below on the lower level. I just came up, we took one picture together like this, and then I went back down and got strapped into my seat, and we began our fall back to Earth. And it takes us about 55 minutes to fall back to Earth. We would end up landing on a runway right back at the Kennedy Space Center, touching down, deploying a drag parachute, rolling to a stop at the end of the runway, and then we just sit and wait for them to open the hatch so we can get out. After we get out, they let us do what we call a walk around so we can take a look at the vehicle. It's one of the only times that astronauts get up close and see the outside of the shuttle. Usually it's in the orbiter processing facility, those hangars, it's being worked on. It's one of the only opportunities when you see it, like the full shuttle here. You put your hand up near these tiles, you'll feel the heat coming off. This is 2 hours after we landed or so. And here you see Tom, our commander, and what he's doing here, he's taking a good look at how close he came to the center line of the runway. Pretty amazing, you know? The space shuttle, we'd fire an engine halfway around the world over the Indian Ocean. The shuttle would fall back to Earth, and we would land within 20 or 30 feet of the exact touchdown point, and our commanders would have it right on the center line. Really incredible. We had the best pilots. Neil Armstrong, as everybody knows, was one of the best test pilots in the world. We still have incredible people today, to help land our space shuttles here. Here's our crew picture in front of Space Shuttle Discovery at the end of the flight. It's always a great moment coming back to Earth again. We're not done with the woodpeckers. 1 month after the flight, we flew back down to the Kennedy Space Center. We'll fly to the different NASA centers and thank all the workers that worked on the mission. And we wanted to thank the team that patched up all the woodpecker holes and just the whole launch team down there that safely gets us to space. So we went down there for the celebration, and Universal Studios sent over Woody Woodpecker from Orlando, so we had to share the stage with Woody Woodpecker that day. So it's something we just couldn't get away from. And the last time our crew got together was in 2008. 2008 was the 50th anniversary of NASA. And the Glenn Research Center up in Cleveland hosted a gala. And they invited all the Ohio astronauts to come back. And so my entire crew from STS-7 came back. At first, they weren't going to invite Kevin Kriegel. They said, well, he's a New Yorker. And we all said, hey, he's an honorary Ohio astronaut. He was on the All-Ohio mission, and they invited him, and he came. And I'm so glad that he was there. Today's Space Shuttle discoveries at the Air and Space Museum down in Washington, D.C. If you ever get a chance, drive down there. It's 6 hours away or so from you, and you get to see Space Shuttle discovery. John Glenn flew on this Space Shuttle. You know, I flew on one of my missions. It flew 39 times to space, more than any other space shuttle. I live about an hour and a half from this, so I like to go down there, take friends and family when they visit the Washington area. I take them down there. And what I say is, that's my space shuttle. You know, it's not mine at all, but that's the way I feel when I see it. So, this is a pretty incredible story about a woodpecker attack, but I learned it wasn't the first time this happened. I was reading a book just a few years ago on the early Thor missile program back in the early 1960s, and the first woodpecker attack occurred at Cape Canaveral out at Launch Pad 17B in 1960. And they had an access arm here, and it was covered with reflective tape, like aluminum tape, and the woodpecker kept going in there and was messing with it, drilling holes in it, ripping it apart. So somebody had the idea, this was before it was a National Wildlife Refuge, let's take a gun. Still not a good idea with a fully fueled missile. So what they did is they set up a tank of nitrogen gas underneath the area where the woodpecker was damaging it. And when the woodpecker came one day, they discharged this bottle of gas, and the unofficial report recorded that the woodpecker tumbled slightly, pitched southeast downrange, and was never seen again. So this is the first recorded instant of a woodpecker attack. And with that, I just want to thank you guys for this opportunity tonight. Thank you all.